I want to talk to you about addition and subtraction of mixed numbers. So the goals for this material is that you'll be able to add mixed numbers and you'll be able to subtract mixed numbers. And so this is material that we're going to sort of emphasize for today, but the big thing that I want you to walk away with today is that oftentimes it's easier to think about things as improper as opposed to being mixed numbers. And so I think it's much easier to convert than it is to just add the straight mixed numbers. But we'll talk through that in a lot of detail here in just a minute. So let me give you just basically two ways of handling things. You can handle whole and fractional parts separately on mixed numbers. So just as a reminder, just so that we're all on the same page, a mixed number, remember, is something like 1 plus 1/2. And what oftentimes you'll see is it written in that way. So the question is, how would you add two of these things together? So for example, if you were to add 1 1/2 and 2 3/4, what's the right thing to do? So there are two ways of doing it. One is that you can handle the whole number and fractional parts separately. Otherwise, you can actually convert this into a fraction and then do the arithmetic, just the way we've been doing adding and subtracting fractions. Converting to a fraction and then doing arithmetic is always going to work. Handling the parts separately does not always work in a sort of basic way. And so sometimes it requires more complex things. I think that in general, if I were to pick one that I would prefer you do, I would say that converting is your better option. It's going to work more often without as much work. Okay, so let's get started and actually do an example. So imagine that we've got 1 1/4 plus 2 2/3. One way of handling this is to add the whole and fractional parts. So we add the whole parts and then we add the fractional parts. So 1 plus 2 is easy, that's 3. Then I need to find a common denominator. Common denominator between 4 and 3 is 12. So I do my conversion and I've got 1/4 is the same as 3/12. 2/3 is the same as 8/12. So I add my fractional parts and I have 3 plus 11/12. So this is using that first method I talked about where you add the whole and fractional parts separately. I think it's better, easier, more reasonable to actually convert it into fractions and then add that. So 1 1/4 is the same as 5/4. And 2 2/3 is the same as 8/3. Once again, the common denominator between 3 and 4 is 12. So I convert this into twelfths, and I have 15/12 and 32/12. Then I just do a straight addition of the fraction, and I'm left with 47/12. I am perfectly happy for you actually to leave your answer like this. I will accept 47/12 without a problem. It may be the case that you're not comfortable with that, or if on a particular context you need to write this as a mixed number, and so you're welcome to write it as 3 plus 11/12. But like I said, I'm perfectly happy with 47/12. Subtraction works very similar. So here's an example where I'm asked to subtract 2 1/2 from 3 1/4. And if I were to do this using the whole numbers and fractional parts, what I would need to do would be to take 3 minus 2 and add to that 1/4 minus 1/2. 3 minus 2 is 1. 1/4 minus 1/2, I need a common denominator. 1/2 is the same as 2/4. So I can say this is 1/4 minus 2/4, which is 1 plus 1 minus 2 over 4, which is the same as 1 minus 1/4, which is the same, because I need to be able to do this, I need a common denominator, as 4/4 minus 1/4, and that gives me 3/4. I find this to be somewhat of a painstaking process, but this is how you do it if you did the number parts minus the fractional parts. What I found to actually be a lot easier, and this is what I meant on the first slide about this will always work if you convert it into the fractions. I think this is much easier. So 3 1/4 is the same as 13/4. 2 1/2 is the same as 5/2. I do still need a common denominator. So the common denominator between 2 and 4 is 4. So now I have 13/4 minus 10/4. That's simply 3/4. So I find converting to fractions to be the faster, easier method. You are welcome to use either method, whichever one you prefer.